Welcome to the Sussex Election 43 show. My name is Brett James, Principal at Sussex Strategy Group, and I am joined today by my colleague, Michael Edwards. Michael is the Director of Digital and Creative at Sussex Adrenaline and leads our digital advocacy efforts. Today, Michael and I want to talk a little bit about two things. One, the use of digital in the election campaign and both the parties and third parties and how digital has really changed the shape of campaigns. And also something that we're very excited about, the launch of the first digital election dashboard that we're aware of in the country and what that means for us and our clients. Michael, I'd like to start with what the last part of that, and that's our own dashboard. If you can tell our viewers a little bit about why we've created it, why it's important.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for having me on, Brett. The election monitoring platform, basically we created this platform because there isn't really a tool out there that gives you, as a government relations professional, the news in a curated way so that you can see, not just the story, but the analysis behind the story from the best sources at any given point in time. But brought together with our expert insight and analysis. So, for a lot of our clients, they have an expectation, for example, that as things happen, stories unfold, key policy areas see changes, whether it be, new announcements from government or promises from political parties. Typically, they expect to get insights, they expect to get updates, they expect to get that analysis from us. And it can be a cumbersome process. You'll have emails coming back and forth. You'll lose something that maybe you saw a little while back that was interesting and now you can't find it. And we thought a much better approach was to take all of the data. And I'm not talking just news data. I'm talking social media data, polling information, anything that's happening in the public space at any given point in time, breaking that down and synthesizing it so that you can get on top of any particular issue when you need it, and get that important information that you're looking for to inform your strategy, your decisions, your go-forward plan for your agenda.
So, as a firm that's been in the business for more than 20 years, our clients are used to getting regular memos from us, especially during an election campaign, what's happening and why. And they would get something from one of our people who's responsible for their file and their issues. How does this bring it together to make it easier for the client?
For sure. So to give an example, let's say there's a new policy that is announced by one of the parties. They promise, if we're in government, we're going to do X. Pick your favorite issue, your favorite policy. You can actually drill down and you can see which specific candidates are talking about that. You can see how that issue is playing on social media, if it's impacted, the engagement of a particular political party and their supporters online. You could go and you could search up a specific postal code or look at a special riding, maybe where, you have a plant or you have a community that's very important to your specific business objectives. And you could see the candidates in that riding and how they're responding to that particular issue. So it's layers and layers of information that are brought together in a very powerful way so that you can get a greater business insight to inform your strategy, as opposed to just saying, oh, Andrew Scheer announced X today. That's interesting,
So if this all sounds interesting to our viewers, how do they go about accessing it?
Yeah, well, if you're watching the show, you're likely already logged in and you're on the free preview of our dashboard right now. And if you have questions, you can reach out to our help desk and we'd be happy to give you a tour of how to use the product. But, navigating through, you can see latest news. You can take a look at the insights section that has interesting articles written by staff here at Sussex. You can take a look at our internal Slack, which is built into the platform. So, as we share insights with each other as a team, you get access to that in real time. And you can use the social media tools and you can use the candidate tools to take a look around and see who's speaking on what issue, where key ridings are, what the prospect is for, featured candidates by each of the parties, and how that story begins to unfold on a daily basis through the platform.
Can a user analyze or take a look at what the leaders are saying versus what people are saying on social media, and see whether the two are in sync or if they're at cross purposes, that kind of thing?
Yeah,
Does that
for
make
sure.
sense?
I mean, the Twitter feeds of all politicians are built into our platform. I mean, as of today, I think we have just shy of 1,200 nominated candidates connected to the Election 43 database that powers our election monitoring platform. And you can go in there and you can get that response. But actually, if you take a look in the social media section of the platform, that's where you can really drill down. You can take a look and see how different parties, candidates, and leaders are all connecting with each other. And actually, I can pull that up while we have a conversation so our users can see.
Yeah, I'd like to show that. And I think that what I find interesting when I've been using the dashboard is to take a look at the conversations of the day and then go back and see trends over the course of a week on issues that are topical at the time, and who's gaining share of voice on those issues. And then when we look at that relative to, say, polling, and we've done in the platform, we've got a polling aggregator, and we're looking at the net result of multiple polls and what that might mean for seat projections, et cetera, and making use of the best available sources out there. What I find interesting is then if we compare that share of voice relative to some of that polling in certain regions, then you understand how that might be playing either well for a party or whether they're missing the mark, and who they're talking to and how they're talking to them.
For sure. So we're logged in right now to the social media section of the dashboard, and you can see we break things down so you can get a full outlook of what's happened in the last 24 hours. You can look at the last 7 days or all time since we started tracking, which was in early June. So you can go through here and you can actually take a look at that share of voice, right? So you can see in the last 24 hours, for example, here, the Liberals have been nearly 50% of the total conversation. And, you know, we do greater analysis on that. So you get the top level stats here, but each day we send a social media update that explains why these numbers are the way they are. And the big story, you know, in the last couple of days has been the prevalence of bots that are,
Right.
you know, anti-Trudeau bots that are starting hashtags and trying to rack up hashtags, trying to get, you know, Trudeau must go type hashtags trending across Canada. And so what we're tracking is not just that volume from the bots, which is a lot of spam, but the anecdotal impact of that. So what's the fallout conversations what are the fallout conversations occurring online amongst the Canadian electorate? And so the way we actually power our dashboard, we have 100% full-time, real-time access to Sysomos' API. So Sysomos is a social media monitoring platform. One of the very few companies, I think perhaps the only company actually, that has 100% of the Twitter fire hose. So when we were scoping out how do we get our data and how do we build this product to give the best analysis possible, we built it on this theory that social media data can be reflective of, you know, the trends that we see in polling and indicative of where the Canadian population is thinking as a collective or as a whole. And where we see the most data for us to be able to kind of capture that and see those trends is on Twitter, because we have such a large sample size of engaged Canadians speaking their minds on different issues. And, you know, already in just over a month or so of tracking, we've had tens of millions of tweets pertinent to the election, whether they're mentioning, you know, candidates or politicians or parties directly, or they're using the CDN Poly or Election 43 hashtags. So with that 100% real-time access, we actually capture every single tweet and every single mention in social media that meets a specific parameter. So we've built out these really comprehensive queries that allow us not only to track the entire conversation, but actually segment those and break them down into topics. So if you take a look here, you'll see that we're tracking the total volume of, you know, followers, people engaged with each of the parties, and this updates on a daily basis. And you can just see the wide gap between the Liberals, for example, and the Conservatives in terms of total followers that the party has.
Is that because the Prime Minister has such a huge following himself?
For sure. So, I mean, Justin Trudeau's following accounts for a sizable percentage, the vast majority, in fact, of that 9.08 million there. But there's a few other things that create this disparity. So the Liberals have very strong French and English social media presences. So you see an increase in number of followers that the Prime Minister has and that the party has on their French language channels, which is something that, while the other parties do, is not something that has the same amount of engagement in Quebec, or actually, I shouldn't say Quebec, but amongst French-speaking Canadians. So that's one reason for the disparity. The other, though, is that Andrew Scheer is a new leader. He was elected as a leader of the party not too long ago, whereas Prime Minister Trudeau has had multiple years now to build up his following. So I'd imagine if Stephen Harper, for example, were still leader, that number would be much higher. But those followers are now Mr. Harper's, and they are not counted as part of the election conversation here.
Does it speak to the demographics of the party's voters? For instance, if we accept that in the last election, the Liberals brought somewhere around 1 million new voters came out. I shouldn't attribute it all to the Liberals, but I think that's a lot of the popular thinking, is that's where most of it came. Younger voters, some that had never voted before. Is it their social media presence combined with a Liberal effort to get those people that leads to this disparity?
So, I mean, I can speak to my experience as someone who's worked years in this space, following digital in politics and digital in advocacy. And I mean, the trend that we consistently see across all of our campaigns here, client campaigns at Sussex, is that Facebook typically has an older demographic in terms of engagement. So, someone between, let's call it 45 and 65 plus is kind of that 20-year, 25-year sweet spot in terms of who's likely to engage on Facebook. But we see a dramatic shift, or we see greater parity when we look at Twitter. So knowing that, the Liberals won largely by engaging a younger demographic last election, I expect that contributes to why there's a greater presence in all channels as opposed to just Facebook or just Twitter. But it also brings some very interesting points when we take a look at this data and when we start to break it down. Because what we're actually able to do is we're actually able to break it down by the key issues that we're focusing on. So if you've logged into the platform, you'll know that we have 30 or so issues that we're tracking that we think are, call it the 30 most important issues facing the electorate, that the electorate will be making decisions on. And what is, I think, really outstanding, and this is my favorite part of the monitoring platform as a whole, is we've actually built in queries to look at social media data in real time and monitor mentions of any of those topics across the Canadian population. So, if we're looking at this list here, we're actually able to take a look and say arts and culture versus taxes. Today, what was the more pressing issue amongst Canadians online? And this is really cool when we actually start to switch to larger views, like our last week view, or even our all-time view, which is everything since we began tracking, because we can go in there and we can see whether or not these trends are holding or if something has changed. And this is that robust insight that you get through our platform that you don't get anywhere else. This is not something that a traditional monitoring tool, social media monitoring tool, can do, largely because they're designed for capturing, raw mentions of specific keywords or queries or Boolean searches. But at the volume that we're pulling data into our platform, it would be prohibitive to engage any typical monitoring platform to get that size of data. So since we're working with 100% of the social media pipeline and 100% of the Twitter, it's called the Twitter fire hose, we're able to do these insights at a one-to-one scale. Which is, infinitely more direct than polling or sampling or surveying or calling. So it's a really unique way to take a look and see how these issues are of importance.
So if I'm an advocacy organization focused on healthcare, an issue that I'm trying to drive in healthcare, can I see then the net effect of whether or not I'm driving conversation, if I've raised the level of importance of my issue and who's engaging on it?
Mm-hmm. Totally. So, I mean, if you're running an advocacy campaign, you'd use our platform as more of a research tool to inform your strategic decisions.
Okay.
And then you'd use your traditional social media tools to monitor and measure your impact. But our platform does capture things like, top tweets or most engaged posts at any given point. So we already see that correlation anecdotally between effort on an issue that is popular or top of mind or top of the conversation on any given day, and what tweets are driving that. So I'll give you an example. One of the third parties that I find to be doing extremely well online this election is Greenpeace. So Greenpeace, not only through their main account, but through ambassadors or individuals that are affiliated with Greenpeace, speaking their own voice online, seem to have disproportionate followings from other advocacy groups, and in turn that translates to increased engagement. So online we're seeing, and here are all-time numbers. The fourth item here on your screen is the environment and climate change. So since we started tracking, we're looking at 373,000 mentions, not just of climate change in general, but climate change related to the federal election.
Okay.
So this is someone talking about it in the context of the federal election, in the context of a news story related to politics, or in the context of a specific party or leader and what they are looking to do with this. So I know we've had a couple guests on already that have spoken about polling and trends and topics, and consistently climate change and environmental issues appear to be a lead theme. So we're seeing it as fourth right now in terms of overall conversation behind U.S. relations, immigration and refugees, national defense. Those are the top three issues. And I think you have a question about that. Just before we get to it, I just want to complete this point here. The translation is almost daily, our top tweet is influenced in some way by a member or someone who's promoting something on behalf of Greenpeace. So their strong engagement increases the overall reach of that issue, which facilitates more engagement, which means that this issue continues to be top of mind. Now, whether Twitter is driving, people to say when they get their polling and surveying calls that the environment and climate change is top of mind, I don't know that it's a direct correlation, but we can see how these things play together if they're in the social consciousness of the country, and we can capture that pretty accurately through the platform.
So my question is about a recent issue. So I was on Alex Pearson's show on AM 640 this week talking about the return of Gerald Butts and what that means in general for the election, but it brings up, there was a pretty significant scandal which it gets lumped under ethics basically, and there have been a few ethics issues that the Prime Minister's had to deal with in the last year in particular. Is that, so the polling shows that ethics actually is up and top ranked in top 3 or 4 issues that Canadians say they're watching and worried about as it relates to the election. But does that translate into what we're seeing online?
So it's definitely translating in terms of the increased volume or chatter around the Liberal Party. So going back to our last week view here, we can see that there's been a slight uptick in terms of overall conversation, and a big part of that is the conversation about Mr. Butts rejoining SNC-Lavalin, etc. Our ethics, what's challenging a little bit when we build these queries is something like ethics is so broad that it's hard to define in a constant manner. So if we were to, take SNC, for example, as a topic and roll that into ethics, we'd have challenges to understand when the context is ethically related and when the context is, related by infrastructure or related to the general business operations of SNC-Lavalin inside Canada. So it gets a little bit more challenging, and there are definitely nuances. When we're looking at the volume that we do look at, which is in the hundreds of thousands to low millions of posts a day across the country, it's hard for us to drill down further. So that's why we focus, we have that qualitative element to our analysis as well on a daily basis. So our social media brief comes out daily, and we're tracking this, from the morning, the second we get up in the morning, right through till when you get your analysis. So we're able to give that kind of color or that explanation as to why. And then we use the data to back up that qualitative analysis of what's going on. And we synthesize it, right? And so again, this is kind of the key, what I think value proposition is. You're not just getting, and we do have it here, you can actually go in and you can get real-time streams for, PPC candidates, NDP candidates, party leaders, to show you kind of where that was from our earlier conversation about being able to follow the leaders. If it were just this, it's not, an accurate representation of what's happening. Right. It's a representation of what's happening in this particular second, or 28 minutes ago in the case of this example here from the Prime Minister's account. So it's really bringing together those millions of data points with the analysis and coupling that with the issues and the insights that give you that 360 look that you can't get from any one channel, but you can get from all of the channels brought together. And that's ultimately what we set out to achieve with this product.
So it's heavily focused on the Twitter conversation, and my own personal experience, I follow it for my news because I'm involved in politics, and I want to closely watch what's happening in Ottawa, Queen's Park, what have you. But we, as an organization, when we're helping our clients with an advocacy campaign, we spend a lot of money on Facebook advertising.
Yeah.
And you talked about the demographic that's using Facebook more. And where I'm going is if you're advising the parties on how to spend their money, I'm thinking of what I know about the demographic support for these leaders and their parties. For instance, Andrew Scheer dominates the over 55 vote. Mm-hmm. So would you say they should spend all their money on Facebook because that's talking to people that are likely to vote for them, or should they spend their money elsewhere to try and convince other voters because they have those?
I think every party needs to have a mix that makes sense for where their specific voters and voting blocks are online. And I think that mix is going to be a little bit different this year than it has in previous election cycles. So if you came to me as a client, for example, and said, Michael, we want you to run a campaign, we want to be a third party, we want to do some advocacy work, odds are that we would start with Facebook exclusively as our strategy, and then we would build out other channels as frankly, the budget increased for the project overall. And that's just because Facebook is so tapped in already and so efficient with their algorithms at targeting Canadians that you can get a lot of mileage on that platform in a more cost-efficient way than the other platforms. But political parties are spending considerably more than what third parties are allowed to spend. We've seen the shift, for example, the Ontario provincial election here. The Progressive Conservative Party spent way more money online than they have in their history, or any party has as a percentage of their overall spend in Canada. And I expect that trend to continue into the federal election with all of these parties. So we look at, let's say, the smaller parties, I'll call them the smaller parties, but the Green, the Bloc, the People's Party. These are parties that likely won't have the same resources to go and buy every single, pre-season Leafs hockey game or whatever in September. Not that, I don't know if that's what you would necessarily want to buy, but they wouldn't have the ability to buy primetime television at the same volume because they don't have the same funds that the larger parties do. So they'll be looking to online as a more efficient way, and then they'll supplement online with some other type of more traditional advertising. So you'll see them playing heavily on Facebook as a result of that. And then really the Liberals and Conservatives are in their own class. I wouldn't lump the NDP in with the Liberals and Conservatives this election just by volume of spend and
They don't have the
engagement.
budget?
I don't think that they have the budget to do the same things that we'll see those other parties do. I would start with Facebook in both cases. But we've moved to a video world. Like, we're doing this show, it's a video show right now. And it's because we recognize that our viewers prefer to watch us than, read us. And so that is not unique to us. That's the trend of the internet. And we're seeing a mandate from Facebook, for example, to be 85% video content by 2020, right? So the next place to put your money, especially if you're taking it out of television, is in video online. And the big challenge here is that Google has essentially decided to withdraw itself from this race. They don't want to deal with compliance issues.
From an election campaign perspective.
Exactly. They don't want to deal with compliance issues. They don't want to deal with, essentially they're trying to prevent having to, end up in a scandal or end up in a Facebook type situation by just writing off the income as a whole. And, for us, let's call it tens of millions of dollars that parties might have spent with Google, low tens of millions, I would say, which includes YouTube. That is just not worth it to a multi-billion dollar company for the headache that it could cause.
Right.
I don't necessarily agree with Google's decision. I don't think it's the right call, but it is what it is, and it shifted the landscape. So that money has to go somewhere else.
It's a Canadian-specific thing right now,
It's a Canadian-specific thing right now for this election. So that money has to go somewhere. So, would you put 100% of your budget then into Facebook and, by extension, Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, and you buy on the same platform, the same advertising platform? Or do you shift more of that to Twitter? Do you shift more of that to native advertising? And my guess is that we'll see the Conservatives stay more in Facebook. And my guess is that we'll see the Liberals spend more. I'm not saying more on Twitter than they do on Facebook, but they'll spend more as a percentage on platforms outside of Facebook. Because going back to where we started in terms of the demographics they're targeting, they do need to reach out to that younger voter. They need to reach out to the urban voter. And they need to look at platforms that give them the opportunity to tell their story to those voters in a way that is not just, simple click-through conversion or performance-focused advertising. So if I were strategizing for the Liberal Party, I'd increase anything that is engagement type material, and I'd focus on promoting that to try to reach these younger audiences that the Conservative Party might not necessarily need to engage in the same way to be successful.
You mentioned People's Party, and it just comes to mind because I suspect that, they don't have a lot of money, but I see them, they seem to have a disproportionate online presence. Is that fair?
Completely disproportionate. And, we've had a couple guests on the show that have emphasized what their data and trends in polling has shown, which is the People's Party. And I mean, we could pull a poll up right here.
Somewhere around 2.5%.
2, 3, 1, 1 for the People's Party here. They're consistently polling under 5%, and 5% would be generous, right? And I think that as a result, we are seeing a lot of people write them off. Now, I need to be clear, I'm not sitting here suggesting that we're going to have a Maxime Bernier majority government or anything close to that, but I think that it is possible for them to win a few seats. And the reason why I say that is because when we look at our candidate database of nominated candidates, they are very high as a percentage, right? So if you look at,
You mean they've nominated more than some of the other parties have?
They have nominated more than some of the other parties have. And until recently, let's take a look here.
But that just means they're in the race in a lot of ridings. It doesn't mean that they have the resources to actually get those over the line.
Well, what's interesting is 256 nominated candidates here for the People's Party. By contrast, the NDP currently have, I don't think that that's actually accurate, but they have under 200 nominated candidates, right? So you look at the volume of Conservative Party, which is closing in on 100% nominations.
Yeah.
And then you look at the People's Party, which is polling at 1.5% in the last poll, and you see that they're pretty close. But what's interesting is each of their nominated candidates also have a riding association. So they have a riding association wherever they have a nominated candidate.
Yeah.
And we did an analysis. Each of those riding associations have their own separate Twitter presence, just as an example. And they have approximately, on average, 200, let's say, or 250 followers. And when you deep dive into them and spot check it, those riding associations have real Canadians that are following them and engaging.
So they're active.
So they're active, and I think
Yeah.
that they have a very strong grassroots on the ground presence. And we're seeing that translate to social media. So it's not just Maxime Bernier, where, combined, if it were just a one-man party, which is, people will say Maxime Bernier's party. Well, here, take a look at the numbers. The Liberals have 9.08 million followers, and we could say 75%, 80%, whatever you want to call that, are Trudeau followers, right? Well, Bernier and the PPC only have 107,000 combined followers. So that disparity, if anything, the Liberals are more of a one-person party than the PPC is a one-person party. Different levels completely, but we see the trend here. I want to show you this one last thing, and then we can move on. But this gap right here is extremely interesting. So you've seen the Liberals as in volume of mentions over the last couple months, kind of hold consistently, ebbing and flowing.
Trend downwards a little bit, looks like.
Maybe, but I think if you were to draw that line through, I'd imagine it's going to go up at a kind of very consistent, slow build toward the election. We're seeing an increase. I think that the Conservatives are on an upswing, and we've seen them very recently in the last week or so finally eclipse the Liberals in terms of owning the conversation, albeit temporarily online. And it is worth noting that these don't have sentiment, these metrics. So, we're seeing the Liberals back in the lead in the conversation, but I'm sure that they don't want it to be about Jerry Butts right now. They want it to be about their policies. But if you look at this purple line here, which is our PPC line, they're on a consistent growth path upward that, could potentially reach the Conservative Party. And I wouldn't be shocked if it did by, late September in terms of volume of people talking about it. So I'm not saying that translates to seats. I wouldn't make the prediction that they're going to, win government or win a meaningful number of seats. But there's an extreme disparity right now between what is happening when you call people and what is happening with the engagement online. So either engagement online means very little in the grand scheme of things, or polling is not nearly as accurate or depictive of how people are likely to vote. Or people are just interested in the PPC but not really interested in voting them, which is a third option.
I think, one thing it says, as it relates to PPC, if you put out policy that is different, becomes controversial, then you're increasing the level of attention and the share of voice, et cetera, right? So some of it may be criticism, but you get people talking. I think that's where you were going. But I think also when you talk about that disparity between the polling and the online conversation, you touched on it. I don't know that people, people don't answer their phones the way they used to. They don't want to talk to somebody the way they used to. I think they give some pro forma answers, or they push the buttons. A lot of them, I think, try to just deliberately screw up the answers in order to mess with the pollsters. It doesn't mean at the end of the day that polling isn't valuable. I do think that it is, and I think that there's a combination of methodologies that helps one get to what's actually valuable and what's really happening. But more and more, certainly I believe where you're going with this is the online conversation is just as indicative of telling you where people's intentions are and where they're going. And I think it can be almost predictive of where things are going to end up too.
I would, listen, that's what I believe, and that's what we saw. We didn't have this level of data or sophistication during the provincial election in Ontario, but we did see that correlation of data in terms of polling results and social media impact. Now that we get 100% of the conversation, across topics, just surveying Canada, 24/7 through our platform, we'll be able to go back and do a really interesting debrief to see whether or not these trends did impact. So I believe that there is a correlation here. And I mean, I check this on a daily basis. I can see it on a daily basis, and it makes sense to me. But we'll have to wait until election day to prove that theory and to see those results in action.
So for a client of ours or a user of the dashboard, let's close off with, if they don't want to follow the horse race day to day and they don't care about the little ebbs and flows of the popular vote, etc., they certainly, I imagine, care about an election outcome as it relates to their issues.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to use this to help them, and what can they take from the platform that's going to help to guide their efforts then?
So we're doing some really exciting things. So if you have a specific issue or a handful of issues that are crucial to your business, to your industry, to your organization, you can come in and you can track those, and we update them on a regular basis. So just as an example here, I have China relations in front of me. You get a background on this particular issue. You get to see the status of the issue. So what's happening right now. So here, obviously, a key component of that is Huawei's Miss Meng. So that's right there. You get to see the parties' positions on that issue, and then updates. So as things are updated, we actually put little status updates. So if the Prime Minister makes a little comment at a presser, there's a question, that might not be the lead story, but that comment was made, and it gets captured here. So rather than having to wait for the news to come to you to be aware of your issue, you can come to your issue and see what news has come and changed or transformed that issue.
Would I get a notification that something's changed on an issue that I care about?
So we are in the process of soliciting feedback from our users to see what is the right mix of notification volume. We don't want the platform to be bombarding, but when key things do happen, we do send out a notification, and hopefully soon you'll be able to customize those notifications a little bit more so you are informed. But the best strategy is to come back and to check the platform for the issues that you're following, to see this content as it gets updated. And then on the right here, actually pulling in real-time stories based on our tracking and monitoring backend on that specific issue. So if you want, a dedicated news feed of, anything to do with, since I'm on the page, I'll use the example, Canada-Chinese relations, you can come in here and we have a very strong search query running across the internet that's pulling up all of that information right next to that qualitative analysis from whomever is the consultant that is focused on that issue for the firm. So it's almost like, if you imagine like a trade desk or something like that, this is like a trade desk for government relations monitoring. You have your analyst that's keeping an eye out on it. You have your information about social media traction, and then you have the issue brief itself, which updates as new information becomes available.
Terrific. Okay, you mentioned off the top that if somebody's watching this, they're probably already in our database, probably a client or a good friend of the firm, and so that's why you got an invitation. But if they've shared it and somebody's watching this and doesn't know how to access our election platform, how do they do so?
So go to our website, sussex-strategy.com, or you can go to election43.ca, and you can request an account if you're interested. Okay. If you go into the platform, if you're on the platform right now, you can actually just click this Invite Colleagues button, and you can put in your friends and colleagues' email addresses, and they'll receive an invite to join the free trial. So this free preview is until August 15th. We also just launched our mobile version, so you can check this on your phone, you can check it on your iPad like I am here, or on the desktop. And you can invite up to 10 people to join you. If you want to continue on with access beyond the free preview, there's an option to review the plans right in the dashboard, and you can make a decision if this is something that you'd like to purchase and continue on with. But again, those plans do include spots for your colleagues So it's a great idea if you're going to continue on to have those colleagues and friends in there, or you can add them after. But it makes it, I think, a very worthwhile opportunity, the plans, because you can share that access with so many people across an organization.
Great. Well, with digital playing a greater and greater role in each campaign as they come along, we focused on a digital dashboard to make life easy for our clients and to bring some unique insights and ability to monitor and adjust to what's happening. We hope you enjoy it, and thank you for joining us for the show today. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks.